The stage lights began to dim. Elvis Presley's face wore an expression no one had ever seen in his entire career. He stopped singing. And then, he whispered. June 26, 1977. Indianapolis Market Square Arena. 20,000 people. The king of rock and roll stood frozen mid-verse, his hand trembling on the microphone. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The orchestra behind him fell silent, confused. The audience held their breath. Elvis wasn't stopping for dramatic effect. This was real. In the third row, an elderly woman in a simple floral dress clutched a folded photograph to her chest. Her face was wet with tears. Elvis had seen her. Their eyes had met. And in that moment, everything changed. What happened next would become one of the most powerful moments in music history. A moment so raw, so human, that it would redefine what it meant to be a performer. But to understand why Elvis Presley stopped his final concert, we need to go back. Back to how this night began. Indianapolis, June 26, 1977. Early evening. The summer heat hung heavy over the arena as thousands filed through the entrance gates. Elvis Presley was scheduled to perform at 8:30 p.m. Fans had traveled from 12 different states. Some had been waiting outside since dawn. The energy was electric, but there was something else in the air that night. A strange, almost sacred quality that no one could quite name. Backstage, Elvis sat in his dressing room, staring at his reflection. At 42 years old, he was exhausted. The relentless touring schedule, the pressure, the loneliness that came with being the most famous man in the world. His manager had pushed for this tour despite Elvis's deteriorating health. Just a few more shows, they'd said. The fans need you. But Elvis knew. Deep in his soul, he knew this tour was different. These weren't just performances anymore. They felt like goodbyes. His bassist, Jerry Sheff, knocked on the door. "King, we're on in 5. Elvis nodded, adjusted his white jumpsuit studded with jewels and eagles, and stood. The outfit weighed nearly 75 pounds. Every movement was an effort. But when those stage lights hit, when he heard the roar of the crowd, something always clicked. The performer in him took over. The opening chords of C.C. Rider filled the arena. Elvis walked onto the stage, and the crowd erupted. 20,000 voices screaming his name. He smiled that crooked smile that had charmed millions. He moved through the first 3 songs with practiced ease, despite the fatigue pulling at his body. But during Hurt, something shifted. Elvis was singing about pain, about loss, about the weight of carrying on when everything inside you is breaking. And as he sang, his eyes scanned the audience. That's when he saw her. Third row, center section. An elderly woman, maybe 70 years old, in a simple floral dress that looked handmade. She wasn't screaming like the others. She wasn't holding up a camera or a sign. She was just crying. Silently. Tears streaming down her weathered face as she clutched something to her chest. Elvis stopped singing mid-verse. The band, confused, kept playing for a few bars before trailing off into silence. The arena fell into a hush so complete you could hear the air conditioning humming overhead. 20,000 people frozen in confusion. What was happening? Elvis never stopped mid-song. Never. The band members exchanged worried glances. Elvis's manager stood up in the wings, alarmed. But Elvis wasn't having a medical emergency. He was having a moment of clarity. A moment of seeing beyond the lights, beyond the performance, into the soul of someone who needed him to be more than Elvis Presley the performer. She needed him to be Elvis Presley the human being. He stepped away from the center microphone. The movement was slow, deliberate. His white jumpsuit caught the lights as he walked to the edge of the stage. Security guards immediately moved forward, thinking something was wrong. But Elvis waved them back with a gentle gesture. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice barely audible even through the sound system. "Ma'am in the floral dress." Third row. The woman looked up, startled. Around her, people turned to stare. She touched her chest, questioning. "Me?" Elvis nodded. Yes, ma'am. You. Would you come up here for a moment? The arena erupted in confused murmuring. This wasn't part of the show. This wasn't scripted. Security didn't know whether to help or intervene. But Elvis's road manager, Joe Esposito, recognized the look in Elvis's eyes. He'd seen it before. When Elvis was about to do something that couldn't be stopped. The woman hesitated. People around her were encouraging her, gently pushing her toward the aisle. She stood on shaking legs, still clutching that folded photograph to her chest. 2 security guards helped her navigate the steps up to the stage. As she climbed those stairs, Elvis Presley, the man who had performed for presidents and kings, knelt down on the stage. He knelt so he could be at eye level with her when she reached the top. The image was striking. The king of rock and roll, in his jeweled jumpsuit, on his knees, reaching out his hand to an elderly woman in a homemade dress. 20,000 people held their breath. She reached the stage. Elvis took her hand gently. "What's your name, ma'am?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but the microphone Elvis held caught it. "Margaret. Margaret Collins. Margaret," Elvis repeated, his voice tender. "You've been crying. Would you tell me why?" The arena was so silent you could hear Margaret's trembling breath through the sound system. This was the moment. The moment when everything that mattered about being human condensed into a single exchange between 2 people who never met. Margaret looked down at the photograph in her hands. Her fingers, gnarled with age, carefully unfolded it. "My son," she said, her voice breaking. "My boy. He loved you so much. Every birthday, every Christmas, all he wanted was your records. He'd save his allowance to buy them." Elvis's jaw tightened. He knew where this was going. "He died," Margaret continued, tears flowing freely now. 3 months ago. Cancer. He was only 19. Her voice cracked on the last word. "He made me promise. Before he passed. He made me promise I'd go to one of your concerts. He said if I could hear you sing just once, I'd understand why your music meant so much to him." The photograph in her hands showed a young man with Elvis's hairstyle, wearing a too big leather jacket, grinning at the camera. The resemblance in the styling was deliberate. A kid who'd idolized Elvis so much he'd tried to become a little piece of him. Elvis took the photograph with trembling hands. For a long moment, he just stared at it. 20,000 people waited. The band waited. The entire world, it seemed, held its breath. When Elvis looked up, there were tears streaming down his face. The king of rock and roll, the man who'd performed through divorces and deaths and every kind of pain life could throw at him, was openly weeping on stage. "What was his name?" Elvis asked quietly. "Thomas. Tommy." Elvis nodded. He looked out at the audience, then back at Margaret. "Tommy had good taste," he said with a sad smile. "And he had a mother who loved him enough to keep a promise even when it broke her heart." He stood, still holding her hand, and turned to his band. "Guys," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need you to do something for me." The band leaned in, listening. "I need you to play in the ghetto. Slow. Like we're singing it in a church." The band members nodded. Charlie Hodge, Elvis's rhythm guitarist, wiped his own eyes before placing his fingers on the strings. Elvis turned back to Margaret. "This song. I recorded it for boys like Tommy. For kids who deserve better than the world gave them. Would you stay up here with me? Would you let me sing this for him?" Margaret nodded, unable to speak. Subscribe now. Don't miss what happens next. This moment changed everything we thought we knew about Elvis Presley. The opening notes of "In the Ghetto" filled the arena. But this wasn't the recorded version people knew. This was slower, more deliberate. Each note weighted with grief. Elvis began to sing, but his voice was different. Raw. Stripped of all performance. This wasn't Elvis the entertainer. This was Elvis the broken human being, singing about loss and pain and the unfairness of young lives cut short. As he sang, he kept one hand on Margaret's shoulder. She stood beside him, crying quietly, clutching Tommy's photograph. And something extraordinary began to happen in the arena. One by one, people in the audience started lighting matches. In 1977, before cell phones, before lighters were common at concerts, people used matches. Little flames flickered to life throughout the arena. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. 20,000 tiny lights creating a constellation of shared grief. But this is where the story becomes truly unbelievable. The part that nobody saw coming. The part that would change Elvis forever. When Elvis reached the final verse, his voice broke. He couldn't finish the line. The words caught in his throat. For a moment, it seemed like the song would end incomplete. But then Margaret did something no one expected. She began to sing. Her voice, trembling and aged but pure, picked up where Elvis had left off. She sang the words her son had loved so much. The words that had meant something to a boy who never gotten the chance to grow old. Elvis listened. This elderly woman, standing on his stage, singing his song, giving voice to her grief in front of 20,000 strangers. And then, softly, he joined her. Their voices blended. The king and the grieving mother. The superstar and the ordinary woman. In that moment, they were equals. Two people sharing the unbearable weight of loss. The arena was transfixed. People weren't just watching a concert anymore. They were witnessing something sacred. A moment of pure, unfiltered humanity. When the song ended, Elvis pulled a white silk scarf from his pocket. It was one of the scarves he usually threw to fans during shows. But instead of tossing it into the crowd, he carefully wrapped it around the photograph of Tommy. Then he took off his own personal guitar pick necklace, the one he'd worn for years, and pressed it into Margaret's hand along with the wrapped photograph. "You tell Tommy," Elvis whispered, but the microphone caught it. "You tell him that Elvis Presley knows he was here tonight. You tell him his mama kept her promise. And you tell him," Elvis's voice cracked, "you tell him that love doesn't end. Not ever. It just changes shape." Margaret collapsed into Elvis's arms, sobbing. And Elvis held her. This woman he'd never met. This mother carrying an impossible grief. He held her while she cried, and 20,000 people watched in stunned silence. Finally, gently, Elvis helped her back down the stage stairs. Security guided her back to her seat, but she moved differently now. The weight hadn't lifted, but something had shifted. She'd been seen. Her grief had been witnessed. Her son had been honored. Elvis walked back to center stage. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, smearing the stage makeup. For a moment, he just stood there, gathering himself. Then he spoke. "I've been doing this for over 20 years, he said quietly. "I've played for more people than I can count. I've had everything a man could ask for. Fame, money, success. But I forget sometimes. I forget why any of it matters." He looked out at the sea of faces. The matches were still lit, thousands of them. "It matters because of people like Margaret. It matters because somewhere out there, a kid named Tommy found something in music that helped him through his life. Even if that life was too short. It matters because we're all hurting. We're all carrying something heavy. And sometimes all we need is for someone to stop and say, 'I see you. Your pain matters. You matter.'" Elvis paused. "I'm tired," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so tired. But tonight reminded me why I can't stop. Not yet. Because maybe, just maybe, one more song might reach one more person who needs it." He turned to his band. "Let's give them Can't Help Falling in Love. For Tommy. For Margaret. For everyone who's ever lost someone they loved." The final song began. But something had changed in that arena. This wasn't just a concert anymore. As Elvis sang, "Can't Help Falling in Love," his voice was different. Vulnerable. Real. The 20,000 people sang with him, every single person. The matches still flickered like stars. When the final note faded, Elvis didn't take a bow. He didn't wave. He simply placed his hand over his heart, looked out at the ocean of faces, and whispered into the microphone, "Thank you for letting me be human tonight." Then he walked off stage. 2 months later, Elvis Presley was gone. But Margaret Collins kept that silk scarf and guitar pick until the day she died. In her will, she donated them to Graceland with a note. These belong to the night Elvis stopped being a king and became a man who understood. The footage of that night was never officially released. But those who were there never forgot. They carried it with them. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop. Look someone in the eye. And say, "I see your pain. You matter." Share this story. Subscribe. Let others know that Elvis Presley's greatest performance wasn't a song. It was a moment of pure humanity. Elvis didn't just give us music. He gave us permission to be broken. And in that brokenness, to find connection. That's the truth he whispered at his last concert. That's what left millions in tears.